16 seasons the Sacramento Kings have gone without making the playoffs. Over the course of those 16 seasons, they've tried and failed in a multitude of ways to put together a winning team. So now, with another chance after moving up in the draft lottery, should Kings general manager Monty McNair and the Kings overall play it safe or take a risk on draft night? NBA draft analyst Bobby Gerould joins me on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and let them know that Locked On sent you. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. This will be my 9th season covering Kings basketball. I'm in year 5 hosting Locked On Kings, and I currently work for ABC 10 News in Sacramento. Bobby Gerould is a frequent guest that I have here on Locked On Kings. The amount of time and passion that he puts into covering the draft and specifically covering draft classes every single year is inspiring and also maddening, because Bobby goes way deeper than just the draft lottery or the first round or hell, even both rounds. Bobby puts together a full breakdown and does in-depth research on every single name that he can come up with who declares themselves eligible for the NBA draft, especially those who do not get drafted and try and carve their path to the NBA through international play or through the G League. Bobby commits his time to covering all of them. Now, of course, with the Kings picking at number 4, thankfully, they're in a position where the top of the draft is what matters to the Sacramento Kings. So, of course, Bobby spends a lot of time studying the top of the draft, has his opinions, his big board, which you can go and check out right now. Bobby does a phenomenal job, top to bottom of this draft, breaking things down, sharing his opinions, applying his unique perspective, and looking at things differently than maybe the typical mock drafter or college basketball, NBA draft analyst would. That's why I love having him here on Locked On Kings. That's why I'm so excited to have him back here on Locked On Kings, and we're going to discuss a lot about the options that the Kings have at 4, but really focus on the Kings taking a risk, maybe going for a guy like Shaedon Sharpe, maybe taking someone higher than they're expected, like a Keegan Murray, or going safe. And I could argue Keegan Murray is a safe pick, even if you take him 2 or 3 spots higher than he's expected to go. He's considered more of a safe pick. Or maybe you go the route that everybody expects to go, which is like a Jaden Ivey, even though there's questions about his fit with De'Aaron Fox. Taking a risk versus playing it safe. What is best for the Sacramento Kings? Of course, Bobby's connection to the Kings organization, being the son of Gary Gerould, legendary Kings radio broadcaster. He's very familiar with the Kings organization too, so he understands the context. I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation, so please sit back, relax. Make sure you tune in or get involved into the conversation as much as you possibly can on Twitter at MattGeorgeSac. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. I guarantee you there's going to be something you want to react to from my conversation with Bobby Gerould. Is it draft night yet? I'm tired of waiting already. As soon as the Kings move up to number 4, the excitement level kicked up extra couple of notches, and so much of the excitement around this draft is simply what's going to happen on draft night. It's so unpredictable. It makes it exciting. It also makes me impatient, and I know I'm not alone in that. Bobby Gerould, NBA draft analyst, of course, the son of Gary Gerould here in Sacramento. You do phenomenal work every year, not just covering like the draft as we know it, like the lottery and the first round. You go deep into the second round. Last year, I had you on before the California Classic, and we went deep into the California Classic roster. It's what I love so much about the work that you do, and you can go and check out Bobby's draft boards right now on hoopobsession.com. Bobby, welcome back to Locked On Kings, my friend. I hope you're enjoying this time of year and the patience is staying strong.
Oh, thank you very much, Matt. Glad to be on. Yeah, it's always an interesting time. It is a little bit of a challenge because I'm trying to rank 135 guys really, and as we've discussed in the past, probably 20 to 25 of them in 5 years will still be in the NBA, and the rest of them will be, either overseas in the G League or retired from basketball. I mean, it's just the way it is. So it's difficult. You got to try to find those 25 to 30 guys that you really trust and that you think are going to be able to stick around and be there for the long haul.
I take it you're a fan of the expansion and the growth of the G League so that more players will get opportunity, correct? It allows you to take a deeper dive into these draft classes, these 100+ players, because some of them may have a route through to the NBA that goes through the Stockton Kings potentially.
Sure. And the G League Ignite team, I think, has been a really good thing too. I had a chance to see the winter showcase in Las Vegas this year and watch all four, actually maybe five of those guys that are potential prospects and draft picks. And then Scoot Henderson, who will be among the lottery picks probably next year. And so it was good to be able to be there in the gym and see some of these guys firsthand. Big fan of Dyson Daniels. I think Jaden Hardy's someone who has some potential down the road. Marjon Beauchamp, I think, is going to be drafted probably in the first round, maybe early second, probably first actually. So, there's definitely some players there. And I think it's really cool the way the Ignite team is set up, because they're playing against other professionals, other men, and they have men as teammates. Pooh Jeter, who's a former King, was one of the leaders of the G League Ignite team. And so, he's kind of helping out guys as a mentor / player coach. And I think it's just a great experience for them.
Well, let's talk about the top of this draft. And number one on your draft board, you have Chet Holmgren out of Gonzaga. Can you tell me a little bit about why he is above a Jabari, above Apollo for you?
And again, I would caution this. He is number one on my board. There's no escaping it right now. But my final board will change up until right before the first draft pick.
I love it.
Yeah, I reserve the right to change my mind is what I'm telling you. But once it's final, it's final. I just think Holmgren, defensively, I think he brings so much to the table. I think he's the kind of guy that can really change the defensive rating and the defensive landscape of a team. I think he's a more skilled player than Evan Mobley was last year, coming out of the draft. And you've seen the impact that he had on winning for the Cavaliers. So Holmgren's he's versatile. His feet are what really kind of surprised me when you really dig into him. The way he's able to move his hips and get ball side foot up when he's on the weak side, and then be able to get wide and defend his player. He recovers easily. He's just so freaking long, Matt. I mean, he just changes shots. If he doesn't block shots, he changes shots. And this year, Gonzaga was 10.6 points per 100 possessions better defensively when he was on the floor. That's a big number. I've been doing this for a long time, and that is a big number. So, I think the ball handling and the offense, to me, he's not superstar that way in offense, but I think when you take the totality of the whole Chet Holmgren package, I think that he'll do enough offensively and then be great defensively to set the table. And so for me, that's why he's number one.
The biggest, most obvious concern that you hear discussed with Chet is his size, or his weight rather, being only 195 pounds. I have a hard time with that argument, just like I have a hard time, Bobby, with the argument for like a Keegan Murray or like Davion Mitchell last year being too old going into the draft, because it's all subjective. In the case of Chet Holmgren, he's a young kid and he's going to go into the NBA and he's going to be hitting the weight room, have nutritionists. Like, he's going to put on weight. Remember how skinny Giannis was. Remember how skinny Kevin Durant was, and in some cases still is. So if that is the biggest gripe, I guess, or concern with Chet Holmgren, I'm not saying it's not legitimate, but that's more of a golden star in his favor in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, any player can get hurt. Certainly the concerns are there. I think it's a legitimate concern when you look at his frame. I know the first time I saw Chet play early in the year, I was absolutely like, there's no way this guy's the first pick in the draft. And then as I watched him more and started to understand and get a feel for the things he could do out there, that kind of changed my mind. And there's been no history so far of him being injured. Now that doesn't mean that something won't pop up. And you do worry about it with that skinny frame. I mean, he's going to get challenged, and people, especially if he ends up being even the first or second pick, he already has a reputation. The NBA vets are going to come after him and really test him and see what he's made of. But I do think that from what I've seen, he doesn't back down from a challenge. He'll take on the challenge and the responsibility. And I think he's a baller. I really do, and I'd say at this point, I'd be willing to roll the dice. He's not like, some other people will bring up some of the other big men flops in the past, Andrea Bargnani and stuff like that. He's not him. That guy couldn't play defense. He doesn't do the things that Chet Holmgren does. I mean, he led the West Coast Conference in box score, plus minus, rebounds, total blocks, field goal percentage, true shooting percentage. I mean, you just don't come in as a freshman, even in a conference like the West Coast Conference, which isn't the greatest conference. No freshman comes in and does that and just dominates the way he did. So he's right now, he's number one on my board, and that would be the way I would go if I were Orlando. But from everything I hear, it sounds like Jabari Smith is going to be their guy.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that. And I actually love the fact that you said right out of the gate that this could change 100 times before draft night itself. One, that tells me you know what the hell you're talking about with this draft. And two, that's what makes this draft so fun. That's what makes this draft so exciting. We've heard the conversation of, it sounds like the closest thing we have to consensus is this top three of Chet, Jabari, and Paulo, although recently Jaden Ivey is suddenly rising in stock and could potentially make his way into the top three. You have outliers like a Shaedon Sharpe, who I'm going to talk about, who is actually third on your board currently. That's what I love about this draft, is it can go in so many different directions, and that so many of these are coin flips, but there still is a lot of talent at the top that even if you don't necessarily get the best guy at number one, I have a feeling Orlando 2, 3, 4 years down the road, they're going to look back at this draft and go, regardless, we got ourselves a baller.
Yeah. And I could be talked in probably, if it was a real compelling argument from someone I respected, I could probably be talked into a lot of different guys being in 5 years the best player in this draft. When you watch Jaden Ivey and some of the things he does, it's spectacular. The way he attacks the basket, there, and that Ja Morant comparison is out there. And I would say this, from a highlight standpoint, the way they dunk and attack the basket, sure, there's that comparison. I think Ja's more of a pass first, maybe not pass first, but he's more of a point guard, more of a true point guard than Jaden is. I think Jaden is a little bit more of a scorer type guy. He played with two really good bigs at Purdue and still probably only had, I think, 23 or 24 more assists than he had turnovers in the entire season. So that tells you a little bit about, where he's at. But he can always improve. And that's the other thing too. If you just look at the ceilings of some of these players, I would say Ivy has a super high ceiling. I would say Shaedon Sharpe has a super high ceiling. Jabari Smith certainly has that super high ceiling. Paulo Banchero's, if they all become what they could max out to be, you could make a case for so many different guys being the best player in this draft when it's ultimately, all said and done.
Bobby, of course, you're extremely familiar with the Sacramento Kings situation, so I don't have to set the scene for you. You know all the context. Jaden Ivey, from the minute the Sacramento Kings moved up to number 4, that's the most consistent name that you see the Kings taking at that 4 spot. I have concerns about fit next to De'Aaron Fox, but I see the ceiling, I see the potential, the burst, the explosiveness, and I drool at the idea of a Fox and Jaden Ivey in transition together, like instantly probably the fastest backcourt in the NBA immediately. But again, we get back to this argument in Sacramento of fit versus best talent available, right? Drafting for fit has gotten the Kings in trouble in the past. However, they're in kind of a win now mode with wanting to maximize having Sabonis and Fox together right now. But Monty McNair has seemingly taken 2 guards, 2 best talent available players in his last 2 drafts. In terms of Jaden Ivey, do you think he checks one box more than the other, talent more than fit? Would you be concerned about fit in that spot? Or do you think, hey, Jaden Ivey at 4 would be a huge win for Sacramento?
I think it would be an interesting fit where maybe you have to make some maneuvers then, just looking at the Kings roster and, you've got Terrence Davis, and is Dante DiVincenzo going to be there? And then you've got Davion, and you've got Fox, and it gets pretty crowded there in the backcourt pretty quickly. You start adding up all these guys all together. I'm not sure about that fit. If it was fit wise, it'd probably be Keegan Murray would be, if he's there at 4, then that's probably your guy. You probably can slot him right in there. Keegan may not have that explosive upside. He may not be as sexy and as exciting as some of these other guys are, but it's hard to argue with the numbers that he put up at Iowa. You look at him, I mean, he rebounds, he scores, he can score a little bit down in the box. He can score from the perimeter. He's awesome in transition. And I think he would fill that need. It's tough to find guys that are those 3-4 hybrids that can switch back and forth. It's probably a little bit more of a 4 in my opinion, but that's what the Kings have needed is someone who can really give them some production from that 4 spot. I think he'd fit in perfectly with Sabonis. So if it was just for fit, I think Keegan Murray would be the guy. And I'm not sure even that I'd be ready to say that he's not the best player available if he's there at 4. It's very possible that he could be. And again, I'm sorry if that sounds like a cop-out, but it's June 1st and the draft is the 23rd. So right. I'm hoping that these thoughts are going to crystallize a little bit more in my brain to really get it locked down. But, I have these conversations with myself all the time when I'm making my own rankings. It's like, man, I could see, like I said, I could see a scenario where Paolo Banchero becomes the best player of this draft. I could see Ivy becoming the best player in this draft. If Keegan Murray just did everything that he did in college and continued to do it in the pros, he could be very, very good. So it'll be interesting to see exactly, what Monty McNair and the Kings have up their sleeve. And, maybe if Murray could slide down a little bit, maybe that's something you look like, maybe make a trade or do something to move down a little bit to try to get Murray.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever increasing number of makes and models, it is now impossible for your local chain auto parts store or dealership to stock all of the parts that you need. Why would you endure pointless and sometimes intimidating questioning while you wait just for the person behind the counter to order the parts on their computer, choosing only the brands that their warehouse happens to carry? You have access to computers. You have access to your phones. You can go to rockauto.com, save yourself some money, and give yourself some variety. 30, 50, or even 100% less money you could spend at rockauto.com compared to your chain auto parts store or dealership. For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump, $353 on average from a chain store, $216 at rockauto.com. And that's just one example of the amazing savings that they have there. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every single customer, and they have everything you could need from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. They've got it all. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in there "How did you hear about us" box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Keegan Murray, I've been pretty consistent with this over the last couple of weeks, although I do expect things to change and people to rise up and drop down on my board seemingly by the hour as we get closer and closer to the draft itself. Yeah. But Keegan Murray has been the pick that I've loved, and it is absolutely more of a fit argument than it is a ceiling argument. I recognize that completely, and again, acknowledge the history of the Kings drafting for fit and it not going so well. Right. So any Kings fan who argues against the pick, I listen to and understand completely. I just love I agree with you that there is a chance that Murray could end up being the 4th best player available or the best player available and best fit at that spot, assuming the top 3 of Chet, Paulo, and Jabari is taken. But also for what the Sacramento Kings are looking for, I was expecting the Kings at 7 to heavily shop that pick and look to trade that pick for already an NBA talent that would slot into that 4 spot and would be able to do everything that we believe Keegan Murray can do. Space the floor and shoot, help defensively, high basketball IQ. Like he just makes so much sense for the Sacramento Kings in so many ways. But that also scares me, Bobby, because it's like, it's so obvious that something has to go wrong.
Yeah, it would seem that way if you're a Kings fan. I think that's one of the things that's always a little bit frustrating to me as a Kings fan, and seeing the turnover in the front office and the turnover with coaches and different things is for those of us who have been here for a long time, and I certainly have been here as long as anybody, going back to their first practice when they were the Kansas City Kings at American River College. I was there. So, it's hard for someone who just comes in to understand the urgency that I think we need to feel as a franchise it's, come on, man, it's been long enough. It's time to put some W's on the board and make the playoffs. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys with potential and upside in this draft, but potential and upside will get you fired, a lot of times too. So, and I think Keegan Murray is one of those guys who probably is one of the safest picks in this draft. He's going to come in and he's going to play well and do the things that are expected of a power forward. And I've used this, I don't like comparisons, but I would say that, when I look at him, take a guy like Tobias Harris, probably not an all-star type guy, but a very solid piece and a starter for many, many years in the NBA. I wouldn't be surprised if that's somewhere near the outcome we get for a Keegan Murray. Maybe he exceeds that and becomes an all-star. But at the very least, I think you're looking at a positional starter, a stable guy for many, many years in the NBA.
What is your philosophy with the fourth pick? Not necessarily for the Kings, but just in general. A lot of people see the fourth pick and see you're at the top of the draft. You absolutely need to get a star in that spot, similar to if you have a top 3 pick. Others are like, if you can get a bona fide daily starter on a winning team from that 4th spot, even if they never reach all-star potential, you've done a very, very good job. Do you lean more towards you have to get a star that high in the draft, or is 4 a good spot to get yourself a established NBA starter for many years?
Yeah, that's a tough question. If we look back at some of the 4th picks in the draft, what are we talking here? Scotty Barnes was that guy last year. So, and he ends up being the rookie of the year. Certainly you'd be happy if you had him. Let's see who else we have here. DeAndre Hunter was the 4th pick, I believe, a couple of years ago. Jaren Jackson Jr. There's a stinker, Josh Jackson.
Current
King.
What I
mean? So, yeah, exactly. So it's such a crapshoot. I mean, we're talking about 19-year-old kids. You're basically gambling on 19-year-old kids. So to me, it just speaks to really doing your homework and trying to get that feel. I just told you, I'm kind of still waiting. Some things have crystallized in my mind, but I'm still waiting for that aha moment where it's like, yes, I feel confident in this order, in this top 5 or 6. But I do think you need to go for the best player available in all cases, especially if you're a team like the Sacramento Kings who have a losing record, over the years. You just have to, and then adjust accordingly, as need be. If you decide that Jaden Ivey's your guy and you draft him at 4, and that means that you have to move on from Terrence Davis, or you have to move on from, then so be it. That's the way the chips fell in this one. Maybe you don't have to maneuver as much if it's Keegan Murray. If it's Shaedon Sharpe, if you really believe that Shaedon Sharpe is going to be that guy, and what a mystery man that guy is. I spent last night before I went to sleep watching Nike EYBL, as much of a full game. They didn't have the actual full game, but they broke down every possession that he was in his highlights. And, from based on that versus what I've seen, I mean, I think he has a really good chance to hit and be a star in the NBA. I mean, he's got the perimeter shooting. He has explosive leaping ability and power. He did a couple things that, people wouldn't talk about, but even in the game that I was watching last night, there was one where the ball was going out of bounds and he ran and made a save that probably only 3 or 4 people in the world would be capable of making. So, you see things like that and it catches your eye, and it's just like, who's to say that this guy can't be the best guy in the draft in 5 years? But it's such an unknown because he didn't play. So then you start getting into questions like, Okay, who was advising him? Because there were injuries at Kentucky, and they were like, okay, we want you to come and play. And I guess his agent, or it was the family or the agent or somebody who said, no, don't do it. You could potentially hurt your draft stock. I've had enough of guys who can't play or don't want to play, or there's too much of that in the world right now with different. There are different examples all throughout the NBA, but I want some guys that are going to play, that are going to bring it. That's what I love about Davion Mitchell. And, I'm on the record last year. I said Davion wouldn't have been my guy. I like Jalen Johnson, and we'll see what Jalen Johnson may ultimately become. He didn't do much last year. He was great in the G League, but didn't do anything in the NBA really for the Atlanta Hawks. But we'll see in 5 years. But I wasn't mad about Davion because I trust him. And I know that work ethic. And then he's brought it. I mean, every penny of it, I think.
Shaedon Sharpe, the mystery of him is so appealing to so many people. You watch those high school mixtapes and you just get drawn into what potentially he could be, like you just talked about. This is less of a fit argument for me because theoretically, fit-wise, he would do a lot of what the Sacramento Kings need. Wing scorers, thank you very much. The Kings always need wing scorers. But I look at the situation that the Sacramento Kings are in. You've lost for 16 straight years. You're trying to win right now. You have basically 2 years to win, or Sabonis probably walks and Monty McNair's out of a job.
Right.
Are you the right team to take a flyer on such a big mystery like Shaedon Sharpe, who could potentially have a tremendously high reward, but are you the right team to take that risk? And I kind of made the same argument for during the coaching search when the Kings were considering Mark Jackson. I believe Mark Jackson could have helped this team. He's had a bunch of interviews, and a bunch of teams over the years have said no. Are the Kings in the right situation after 16 years of missing the playoffs to take the flyer and to give him that opportunity? It's an argument more for a safe pick like a Keegan Murray than it is for a risk, but that's kind of where I'm at. Do you understand that argument, or are you more the upside, like you just got to take it because it's potentially phenomenal?
No, I definitely understand the argument. And like I said, I'm a reasonable guy. I'll listen to any argument and try to, really see where someone's coming from and try to put myself in their shoes and understand that. And I think if I was in Monty McNair's shoes, it would be difficult. But I go back, and this is taking it way back, and I'm in no way saying that Shaedon Sharpe is going to be Kobe Bryant. But let's go back to that draft. And, it was like, Jerry West was pretty sure that his eyes saw something special in Kobe Bryant. And so he maneuvered and made a deal and got Kobe Bryant, and the rest was history.
Yep.
So, I would just, as much as the Kings in the short term want to have a fix and make it to the playoffs, you don't want to be the team that passed on a superstar. And so, I think you really do have to weigh that heavily. You have to try to, trust your eyes and your feel. And I guess for me, it's real easy for me to just throw Shaedon Sharpe up there as the third guy. And that, that may change before it's all said and done. But, if I was in the Kings front office, I would definitely be, I'd be all over that like an FBI guy. You know what I mean? I would just be hound dogging to try to find out what's his mentality. What's, is he an alpha dog? Is he just another guy? What do his teammates think of him? Who really is advising him? What's the track record of his agent? There are so many intangibles that you have to get into to, because you can't forget you're drafting a human being here. We're not just drafting a spot up on the board where it's like, okay, Shaedon Sharpe, and then we bring him in. I mean, we've seen that already through difficulties with Marvin Bagley, whether it was of his doing or not. I think there's blame on both sides of the fence there for how the Kings handled things and how Marvin's team handled things. But quite honestly, it was a bit of a headache. And so that's a problem for me. I wouldn't want to bring in a guy who's a headache. And like you said, if you've got a year left on your contract, and you're Monty McNair, and it's this team, Shaedon Sharpe comes in, and God forbid, does he even want to play summer league, or is he going to be worried about hurting himself in summer league, stuff like that? We need someone who's going to come in and ball.
Locked On Kings, also brought to you by our friends at BetOnline, the #1 source for all your betting, stats, and sports information. Make money the best way possible through sports gambling, and that's with BetOnline. Not only do they give you the game lines that you expect from the NBA Finals going on right now to NHL hockey playoffs happening right now, Major League Baseball, of course, fighting news, MMA, UFC, they got it all. In addition to that, they have fun future bets, prompt bets. There's great future bets surrounding the NFL that are out right now. You can make your money in so many ways with your plethora of sports knowledge at BetOnline. They're your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, esports, and more. Head to the website today, use your mobile device, learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. If this consensus top 3 ends up holding true and still so much time before draft night itself, if there is a, however unlikely, if there is a out of the 3 in your mind, like if the Kings want one of those 3 to slide to them, it is this guy. Who out of those 3, Chet, Jabari, Apollo, do you think the Kings have their fingers crossed the most that slides to them at 4?
I feel like if Chet fell, it would be fantastic. And, again, maybe you have to make some adjustments there because I'm not sure. I don't really buy Sabonis as a 4. I think he's a 5. And I'm not sure if Chet, I could see Chet right now playing 4. I think he shoots it well enough, but I'm not sure eventually if he isn't just going to be a 5, just, due to his size and whether or not he'd be able to move his feet well enough and all that kind of stuff. So I think that would be, if Chet fell, that would be tremendous. Beyond that, I think if Paolo Banchero fell, I think you could get pretty excited about that as well. Although it might be a little bit scary. He has a ways to go too. I think defensively he could be more locked in. I would hope that with NBA coaching, he'll become a better defender. I think one-on-one on the ball, he's okay, but as a team defender, I think he has a ways to go. I think he had moments where he kind of just wasn't locked in. I guess is the way I would say it. But I do think he has the potential to be a much better defender, and he has the toolbox. I mean, when you watch him at his best, you think, wow, there's a future NBA All-Star. At least that was my thought when I watched him.
Well, Bobby, we spent so much time talking about the top of this draft. Of course, the Kings at 4, that's where the conversation is mostly going to end up. But like we said at the beginning, your draft board and your analysis goes 100 plus picks deep, not just the lottery itself. So this is one of my favorite parts, what I've been looking forward to the most. I have a pad of paper and a pen in front of me right here. Can you list off some names that are outside of the lottery or not, maybe at the very end of the lottery, aren't necessarily talked about, names in this draft class that you think have a ton of potential to be, when we're looking back at this draft 4 or 5 years from now, if there's a redraft, suddenly those guys are higher up and we're going, how in the world did this guy slide all the way to blank?
Yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of Tari Eason and what he may be able to become. He has a long way to go as far as the feel is concerned. As far as, being, I think he's a more turnover than assist type guy, at this point. But in watching, when I watch games, I'm always taking notes, and I'll go back and look at my notes. And sometimes this may sound ridiculous, but if someone does something that I really impresses me, and it could be just an intangible thing, I'll just write, nice, really nice. I might write, and there were a lot of when Tari Eason was going to the basket. He has big, huge hands, and reminded me a little bit of some of the things I saw in Kawhi Leonard. And he's a guy who historically was really overlooked, as far as a draft pick was concerned. So I think Tari Eason is one of those guys. Then there are a bunch of guys towards the end of the draft, or at least that's how it seems to be in mocks right now, that were good high school players that just didn't get it done for one reason or another in college. A guy like Peyton Watson comes to mind from UCLA. Barely played. I think he played less than 500 minutes this year at UCLA, but UCLA was in kind of a win now mode with Johnny Juzang and Jaime Jaquez. And Peyton Watson had to play second fiddle and kind of an understudy. And when you go back and look at some of the things he did in high school and his athletic ability, the way he runs the floor, he's got over a 7-foot wingspan. I think he's one of those guys that could be a little bit Zaire Williams-ish, in the sense that a lot of people overlooked him And then, the Memphis Grizzlies were like, no, we like this guy. And they took him, and it looks like it's going to be a good pick. Maybe he didn't have the greatest season, but you can certainly see the flashes when you watch him. So I think Peyton Watson would be one of those guys. I like David Roddy a lot from Colorado State. He's a beast wing player who I think is overlooked by a lot of people. I think eventually he's probably going to move down my draft board because you could probably get him in the second round. So I would take that into account, probably not take him as highly as I have him rated right now. But when I watch him, I see a dude that if he was to get into what I would call NBA shape, or even better than that, Miami Heat shape, you know what I mean?
I got you.
Yeah, I really think he could unlock more of his game, and just some of the things I see with his explosiveness, his ability to do things and score the basketball. And he's just so strong. He has a rock solid base, biggest calves you'll probably see in the NBA next year. So David Roddy is someone who I'm definitely a fan of. I like Christian Coloco from Arizona probably more than the consensus does. I really like the way he moves his feet. I just think he's a big that's probably a little bit underrated at this point.
Bobby, you're phenomenal at what you do. Thank you so much for being willing to come on here. Whatever the Kings do on draft night, I'll have to have you back on to talk about it. Plus, with the California Classic coming up, it's not in Sacramento this year. It's going to be in the Bay Area, but the Sacramento Kings are still participating. And with Bobby Jackson at the helm of the Stockton Kings, it's very much worth paying attention to. So we'll have to do it again very soon if you're willing. I really appreciate you taking this time. Love having you.
Oh, absolutely, Matt. Anytime, if it's basketball, I'm ready to talk about it.
A pleasure as always having Bobby here on the Locked On Kings podcast. It's safe to say, am leaning towards the safer route for the Kings, because I do believe even the safer route in the case of Keegan Murray, who by now you should know that I love, I still think that can pay off and there can be a high reward side to Keegan Murray and his overall talent. But I do understand the appeal of a Shaedon Sharpe, even though there's more mystery and risk to that route. Are you one that looks at this fourth pick and says this has to be a star, or are you okay with this fourth pick turning into a solid, consistent starter on hopefully a winning Sacramento Kings team? Let me know where you're at on that, at Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, and leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. The Locked On NBA Ultimate Mock Draft is back. It is coming very, very soon, in just a couple of weeks here. If you're not familiar with the Ultimate Mock Draft, basically every single team has a local host here as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, I'm the local host for the Sacramento Kings. We all take control of our teams and draft the first round of the draft. But it's not just the draft itself. We can trade picks. We can get crazy. We basically become fantasy general managers for an entire exercise. And we put together a 5-part week-long series of episodes breaking down the picks. We have national and local analysts come in and talk about the picks, talk about the selection. No other podcast network does this and does what we do. And this is, I think, the 5th year or the 6th year now that we're doing it. There's so much fun. I've enjoyed every single one that I've been a part of. And I can tell you right now, as the one in charge of this number 4 pick for the Sacramento Kings, I am in a lot of conversations, a lot of negotiations, have filled a lot of calls from a lot of different hosts who are interested in the number 4 pick. Will I make a trade? Will I select a player number 4 overall? Who will I select? You're going to have to find out by listening to the Ultimate Mock Draft coming very soon on the Locked On Podcast Network. And maybe if you've missed the amount of content that I've put out there, I'm giving you an opportunity to catch up a little bit over the last couple of weeks, because I'm taking a bit of a break. I'm going on a much needed break, much needed vacation, a little golf trip this weekend. Any golfers out there know that even if it is a trip and vacation, even if it's supposed to be fun, can be plenty frustrating at times, but I'm looking forward to it. So we will not have a Locked On Kings podcast on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. We'll be back on Monday, have more guests planned already for next week. So we'll hit the ball rolling or hit the ground rolling right when we come back. So I look forward to doing that. And I hope you're okay with a little hiatus of of Locked On Kings content over the weekend. Can't wait to come back though, refreshed and ready to keep hitting this draft talk hard and this offseason hard, as we will continue to be your number one source for Sacramento Kings news, talk, entertainment, and information over the course of the entire offseason. Appreciate you so much for joining me. Can't wait to have you join me next week on Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.